Percentages, decimals, and fractions. Now, before we go any further with this, and before I explain why there's a big triangle on the screen, let's just talk a little bit about percentages, decimals, and fractions. The first thing I want to say at this stage is to remind you about what percent actually means. Now, percent quite literally means this. If you're using the word percent, if you're using the symbol percent, it means out of 100. Okay. If you're looking at a decimal, now let's just imagine we've got a decimal something like 0.23. Just remember that a decimal is a way of showing a number which is less than 1. If you have a number with a decimal point and a 0 to the left of the decimal point with numbers after it, it means it's more than 0, but it's less than 1. So bear that one in mind as well. And finally, if you're looking at a fraction, now let's just take the fraction 2/5. Think of this in another way. Imagine that you have a test score, and imagine that you got, out of 5 questions asked, you got 2 of them correct. Apart from being a little disappointed with your score, this is how you would write it. You would write it as 2 out of 5, or in other words, 2/5. Okay? So just remember that it can be written like that. It can be written as 2 out of 5. Okay, on to the triangle now. Let's start with a percentage at the top here then. And let's go with 17%. So this is the percentage bit. Down here, I'm going to show you what the equivalent fraction would be, the same fraction. Now remember, what did we say earlier about what percent means? It means out of 100. So if you have 17%, that means that you have 17 out of 100. For any percentage that you want to turn into a fraction, all you need to remember is that it's always going to look like this. On the top line of your fraction would be whatever your percentage is. In our case, it was 17. And that's going to be divided by 100. So for any percentage at all, to turn it into a fraction, you simply take your percentage and divide it, put it over 100. Okay, what if you want to go from a fraction, in this case 17 over 100, and you want to turn it into a decimal? Well, let's put our decimal over here. Here's what you do. You do exactly what the fraction says. The fraction says that you take 17 and you divide it by 100. Now remember, there's no decimal point here, so if you imagine that it's sitting there, invisible, waiting to be used, and you move the number 2 places to the right, you end up with 17 over 100 equal to 0.17. All we've done here is divided exactly as the fraction has told us. Okay, now we want to go from a decimal in this case of 0.17, and turn it into a percentage. What do we do here? Well, why don't we pause the video for a wee second and see if you can look at this number here, this is 0.17, and you look at your 17% and come up with your own way of getting from the decimal up to the percentage. Okay, here's what you do. All you have to do is take your 0.17 and turn it into 17 by multiplying by 100. So 0.17 multiplied by 100 becomes 17%. So we've looked at how to go from a percentage and then round to a fraction, onto a decimal and back to a percentage. What do you do if you want to go in the opposite direction? What happens if you have a percentage and you want to turn it into a decimal? You do precisely the opposite. So for this here, if you have 17%, instead of multiplying by 100, you divide by 100. Okay, what happens if we want to go in the opposite direction now between 0.17, a decimal, and 17 over 100, our fraction? Going from the fraction to a decimal, we divided. We just divided exactly as the fraction told us, in this case by 100. To go from a decimal back to the fraction, you guessed it, you multiply by 100. The one little difference between going from a fraction to a decimal and back the other way is that if you're going from the fraction to the decimal, then all you do is divide exactly as it says in your fraction. You divide the top number by whatever your bottom number is, even if it's not 100. But when you go from your decimal back to your fraction, you always multiply by 100. If you do this, you will of course end up with a fraction over 100, and in some cases you may be able to simplify that, keep its value the same but make the number smaller. That's something that we'll cover in a different video. Okay, finally, what if you want to go from a fraction back to a percentage? Well, this one, there's two steps to it. The first one, all you do is you divide. You divide the fraction exactly as it tells you to. So in this case, 17 divided by 100. So step 1, divide. What's step 2? Step 2, once you have your answer, is simple. You just multiply by 100. And that's the same step no matter what fraction you have to start with. You always multiply by 100. Now, there is a lot of information on that triangle, and that's the kind of thing that you might want to take a screenshot of and have handy anytime you're working with percentages, with decimals and with fractions, and you feel like you might need a wee reminder. Eventually you'll be able to do this without any help whatsoever, but to begin with, that's perhaps a good idea. Okay, now to show you this in action, we'll just finish off the video, the last minute or two, with converting some percentages into fractions and finally into decimals. I'm going to start with a percentage, and I'm going to start with 14%. I'm going to turn it into a fraction. And if you look here, percentage to a fraction, all you take is your percentage on the top and you divide it by 100. So you end up with 14 divided by 100. I then want to turn that into a percentage, into a decimal rather. So all you do is divide exactly as the fraction tells you. 14 divided by 100. And that becomes 0.14. Okay, before we go on to the next example, you may have noticed that this fraction here can be simplified. Simplifying simply means keeping the value of the fraction the same, but making the numbers on the top and the bottom smaller. It's something that we'll go into detail and explain to you in another video, but if you're curious, this fraction can be simplified to 7 over 50. All we've done there is divide the top by 2 and the bottom by 2. But more of that later. Let's get on to a slightly more challenging example. Let's start then with our final example, and let's make it 5.6%. The first thing we're going to do is turn it into a fraction. And as our triangle here tells us, we simply take our percentage over 100. So our fraction will be 5.6 divided by 100. Now, when you write a fraction, you should never have a decimal on the top line. We need to get rid of that decimal point. How are we going to do it? Well, I've hinted at this already earlier in the video, but if you have a fraction, if you multiply the top, the numerator, and the bottom, the denominator, by the same value, the same number, you'll end up with a new, different looking fraction, but its value will be the same. Now in this case, if you have a number after the decimal point, the obvious number to multiply by is 10. So if you multiply the top by 10, you end up with 56. If you've multiplied the top by 10, to keep the fraction the same value, you multiply the bottom also by 10. 100 multiplied by 10 gives you 1000. Okay, all we have left to do now is turn 56 divided by 1000 into a decimal. And as you can see from your triangle here, all you have to do is do exactly what the fraction tells you. Divide 56 by 1000. 56 divided by 1000 gives you an answer of 0.056. Now if you do this kind of calculation here, going from fraction to decimal, with a calculator, that is perfectly acceptable. But if you're keen to practice doing this without a calculator, without the need for one, doing it mentally in your head, then look at the other video which deals with dividing by 10, 100 and 1000. Thanks for watching.